welcome. I'm Isuma Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu said victory over Iran could help expand regional peace accords and strengthen diplomatic ties, according to reports. Meanwhile, the White House dismissed Iran's response as an attempt to save face amid Israel's push to build on the Abraham Accords. EU leaders have renewed sanctions on Russia for another 6 months over its war in Ukraine, according to officials. Meanwhile, European Commission President von der Leyen has confirmed the receipt of a new US trade proposal amid transatlantic trade tensions. Israel has halted aid to northern Gaza over alleged Hamas theft, which both Hamas and local clans deny. Meanwhile, Spain's prime minister has accused Israel of committing a genocide, and the US has approved $30 million in funding for the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, according to media reports. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif discussed promoting a durable peace between Israel and Iran in a call, according to the US State Department. Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo are set to sign a peace deal in Washington today, a diplomatic breakthrough to end years of conflict in eastern DRC that has claimed thousands of lives, according to media reports. Thailand's Finance Minister Pichaichun Hawajira has announced that he will travel to the US next week for scheduled trade talks. He confirmed the negotiation date but did not provide further details, according to media reports. The Dalai Lama will mark his 90th birthday on July 6th, with Tibetans in exile celebrating amid growing uncertainty over his succession, according to media reports. Japan has executed Takahiro Shiraishi, known as the Twitter killer, on today for the 2017 murders of 9 people he lured through social media. This was the first execution under the current Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba's administration, according to local reports. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has rejected speculation that Tehran plans to resume nuclear talks with the United States. He said there is no plan, agreement, or arrangement for new negotiations following the 12-day war with Israel. Araghchi also announced that a new law suspending cooperation with the United Nations nuclear watchdog is now binding, passed by Iran's parliament and approved by its Guardian Council. The bill formally alters Tehran's relationship with the IAEA. On the damage to Iran's nuclear sites, Araghchi confirmed the impact was serious and that a full assessment is underway. He said Tehran will seek compensation as part of its diplomatic strategy. This comes as President Trump claims US strikes obliterated key facilities, a description Iran continues to contest.
توافقی الان برای شروع مجدد مذاکره صورت نگرفت. من به صراحت عرض می‌کنم نه قراری گذاشته شده، نه قولی گذاشته شده، نه اصلا صحبتی ما کردیم برای شروع مجدد مذاکره. ولی اینکه بین خودمون داریم بررسی می‌کنیم که مصلحت مردم ایران چه هست، اون یه بحث دیگری است. تا الان هیچ قراری، هیچ موضوعیتی برای مذاکره گذاشته یعنی.
Now we have guests joining us for this discussion. Shruti Das Gupta, she's international affairs expert, joining us live from New Delhi. Thank you for joining us today, Shruti. Good to see you. What does Araghchi's outright rejection of talks signal about current Tehran's diplomatic posture?
Greetings, Asuma. Thank you for inviting me to your show. Tehran is obviously in a very bad state if we consider the nuclear program that they were actually holding. We as an IAEA and the rest of the West does not have any visibility on the 400 kgs of uranium that was enriched up to 60%. It was moved, and I do believe it was moved, though these reports are speculative as of now. It was moved while the 12-day war was occurring. So we do not know where such a large cache of enriched uranium is. Now, beyond that, the JPCOA of 2015 had two sets of sanctions. There were sunset sanctions that were going to be lifted, sunsets clause. The first one is going to be lifted in October of 2025. And the West wants Tehran and Iran back on the talking table and signing new deals regarding its uranium and its nuclear plans. We have to understand why this is important is because Iran has access to nuclear weaponization plans since the early 90s. And this was discovered in 2000s where the first set of sanctions came through. It also has not stopped its ballistic missile ambitions, and that was one of the reasons why President Trump 1.0 regime walked out of the JPCOA when they realized that no amount of sanctions is able to limit the ambitions of weaponizations that Iran has. Now, with this war, though we understand that the facilities continue to be inoperable, they are not obliterated. They can be repaired and functions can be resumed. Now, the first sunset clause was like a parole that, okay, if Iran was behaving as a civilized nation and was obeying the West in its sanctions, it would have been able to use more uranium and do more with its facilities. But as of now, we've seen that it was doing a lot under the cover, and we need IAEA inside there. But IAEA is now not permitted to enter. So we have no clue how damaged those facilities are, where the enriched uranium is, and what Iran plans to do with it. There may be more hidden facilities around that could be used to take the steps further and weaponize that uranium and make Iran a much more dangerous nation for the world. Asuma.
Thank you, Shruti. You will stay with us, and now we stay on this news. Top U.S. officials briefed all 100 senators in a closed-door session on the strikes against Iran's nuclear sites. The military used 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs to hit 3 facilities last week. Republicans say the strikes dealt a major blow, while Democrats warn the action may be unconstitutional. Senators also caution Iran could have moved enriched uranium before the strikes. A resolution requiring congressional approval for future strikes may be voted on this week. Meanwhile, the Trump administration is slamming U.S. media outlets over reports that question the impact of American strikes on Iran's nuclear sites. President Trump and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth insist the strikes were a total success, decimating and obliterating Iran's nuclear infrastructure during the 12-day conflict with Israel. Meanwhile, the White House is hitting back at Iran's supreme leader, accusing Ayatollah Ali Khamenei of trying to save face. This comes after Khamenei publicly downplayed the damage from recent U.S. strikes on Iran's nuclear sites. Listen in to what White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt has said.
We saw the Ayatollah's video, and when you have a totalitarian regime, you have to save face. I think any common sense, open-minded person knows the truth about the precision strikes on Saturday night. They were wildly successful, and it's what led to the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Iran, which the president is very grateful.
Now we go back to our discussion with guest Shruti Dasgupta. She's international affairs expert. Thank you, Shruti, for staying with us. Now we have comments come in regarding US's strike, and what do we actually know about the real impact of the US strikes? Was it as decisive as the White House claims?
The B-2 bombers did deliver their bunker busters, and those bunker busters, they may not cause a lot of damage over the surface, but they do create sufficient damage to stop the centrifuges, which are a very delicate set of equipment that spin at very high speeds to enrich the uranium. So any kind of a vibration or high level or low level disturbs that particular facility. If the bunker buster, which we see through satellite imagery, has been dropped, it would definitely ensure that those particular sites, Isfahan, Fordo, and Natanz, those 3 sites will definitely not be usable currently. It does push back Iran's nuclear ambitions by many, many years. But does it stop it? No. The only way you can stop any nation's nuclear ambitions is either by ensuring that they do not have access to technology or plans, or you end up having them willingly sign accords which ensure that they will not they will be part of the non-proliferation. But despite filing and despite trying to sanction the nation, despite being part of the nuclear non-proliferation treaty, Iran has continued its ambition. 60% enriched uranium is not for civil use. Its only use is military, and the 60% is a stage which is a preliminary stage towards the 90% enriched uranium, which would be weaponized. So this particular attack was a requirement that needed that an Arab nation does not get its hands on a nuclear weapon. It was a much needed attack. But does it end Iran's nuclear ambitions? No. Does it completely destroy those facilities? No. It restricts their use. They are no longer functional as of now, but they can be repaired and they can be put back in action if Iran is open to is allowed to grow rich again, and the regime continues to be as belligerent towards the needs of humanity and the Arab world. Asuma.
Das Gupta for joining us today and sharing that insight. Now we move on to our next news. French President Emmanuel Macron says U.S. strikes on Iran's nuclear sites were genuinely effective, but warns that the worst outcome would be if Iran quits the global non-proliferation treaty. Macron spoke after an EU summit in Brussels, calling Iran's potential exit a collective weakening. To prevent that, he's launching talks with the UN Security Council's permanent members and has already spoken with President Trump. The strikes last week involved US B-2 bombers and a missile submarine hitting 3 Iranian nuclear facilities. Trump called the attacks a spectacular military success, claiming they obliterated Iran's program. But a leaked US intelligence assessment suggests the damage may only delay Iran's nuclear ambitions by months, a report sharply criticized by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. Iran, meanwhile, is accusing the UN nuclear watchdog of siding with Israel and may withdraw from the 1970 NPT, which could spark a global arms control crisis. Listen in to what French President Emmanuel Macron has said.
De le dire, pour moi, le pire scénario serait celui où on laisserait l'Iran après ces frappes qui ont eu une efficacité réelle. Les frappes américaines ont eu une efficacité réelle sur Natanz, Ispahan et Fordo. Mais le pire, ce serait que derrière, la conséquence soit une sortie du traité de non-prolifération de l'Iran et donc au fond une dérive et un affaiblissement collectif.
Now we have guests joining us for this discussion. Peter Baum, he's a foreign editor of Weekly Blitz, joining us live from London. Thank you, Peter, for joining us today. Good to see you. If Iran leaves the non-proliferation treaty, how big a blow would that be to the global arms control regime, according to you?
I don't think it will be, in practice, a blow, because what we're seeing at the moment, after the ceasefire being in effect a couple of days now, is a game of bluff and bluster. And the Iranians have not much in their armory to pull the strings here. The idea that that they could re-establish a nuclear program in the months ahead has been touted around the media. But given the damage that has been done to their 3 nuclear facilities, the number of personnel who would take years, the number of personnel eliminated who would take years to replace, it is highly doubtful whether, if they started today, the Iranians could get anywhere near the level of uranium enrichment they were in a few months' time seems to me to be preposterous. Now, the idea that they're talking about not joining talks, etc., etc., I think is a game of bluff and bluster. They're simply biding their time because the regime has been so devastated. They don't have the people in power to create the conditions necessary for them to negotiate with those that have clearly won this, let's say, military exercise. So I think we will continue for the days ahead, possibly weeks ahead, Iranians trying to put pressure on the United Nations, on the Trump administration, by suggesting that they're not joining any talks and they won't do so until certain conditions are met. The only conditions that the Iranians are currently fearful of not meeting is that the current regime will stay in power. Because as we're talking, and even since the ceasefire, there have been numerous explosions within Iran, numerous assassinations, numerous riots, which we're not seeing from the Iranian media for obvious reasons, and what's going on internally in terms of trying to, for regime change, is the main considerations that Iranians are undertaking. And they clearly don't have any appetite at this moment in time to come to the negotiating table because they're not in a position to.
Thank you, Peter Baum. You will stay with us for our next news. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the war with Iran has opened new doors for peace. Speaking Thursday, he called it a victory that must now be used to expand regional diplomacy, including a potential broadening of the Abraham Accords to Saudi Arabia and even Syria. Netanyahu said the war, alongside the fight against Hamas and the effort to free hostages, creates a window that cannot be missed. Israel Hayom reported that Netanyahu and President Donald Trump agreed on a possible 2-week timeline to end the war in Gaza, a war that's lasted for more than 20 months, killed thousands, and left most of Gaza's population displaced. The report also suggests Israel may back a future two-state solution provided the Palestinian Authority undergoes reforms. But that's drawing strong rejection from far-right Israeli ministers who say a Palestinian state is off the table. Netanyahu, however, insists Israel's position in the region has strengthened and called this moment a tectonic shift in Middle East politics. Let's listen in to what Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said.
במקורותינו כתוב, אדוני עוז לעמו ייתן, אדוני יברך את עמו בשלום. אנחנו נלחמנו בעוז נגד איראן והשגנו ניצחון גדול. והניצחון הזה פותח הזדמנות להרחבה דרמטית של הסכמי השלום. אנחנו עובדים על כך במרץ. לצד שחרור חטופינו והכרעת החמאס, יש פה הזדמנות, חלון הזדמנויות שנפתח, ואסור להחמיץ אותו. אסור לבזבז אפילו יום אחד.
Now we have guests joining us for this discussion. Peter Baum, he's a foreign editor in Weekly Blitz. Thank you, Peter, for staying with us. What is your reaction towards what may happen in the coming 2 weeks? Do we see some hope, and do we see some light under in the exit of in the end of this tunnel?
Look, there must always be hope whilst people are talking to each other. If we go back to October the 7th, if the Israelis thought then that after that devastating blow, nearly 2 years down the road, the Hamas, the Iranian defensive shield of their proxies, Hezbollah, the Houthis and Hamas, had been totally defeated, which they have been, and Iran herself had been dramatically weakened by both Israeli attacks and US attacks. I think the Israelis would have undoubtedly taken that position on the chessboard. The fact now that Syria the overthrow of the Assad government was an actual bonus for the Israelis and her allies. The fact that Assad was acting virtually as a proxy as well for Iran, and the fact that that regime has now gone and that a new regime has come into place and is even talking about being part of the Abraham Accords. If that actually happens, that is a major, major political win for Israel. Now, the quid pro quo of that is the two-state solution, which I thought, I must admit, was actually dead. I could not see how any Israeli government would even contemplate a two-state solution. The Palestinians themselves don't have a united government. They're in two separate territories, what you call the West Bank and in Gaza. And the fact that the Netanyahu is contemplating it, again, I think is just for the birds. I think he's probably making the right sounds for the global media, for the United Nations, etc. But I do not think it's practical for a Palestinian state to come into being, this so-called two-state solution, for years ahead. I just don't see it, if anything, because the Palestinians themselves are so divided. And the fact that Israel, despite Netanyahu's comments, really does not want another hostile state on its borders.
Thank you very much, Peter Bohm, for joining us and sharing that insight with us. Now we move on to our next news. In a fresh development in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Ukrainian prisoners of war have returned home following a new swap deal with Russia. Relatives emotionally welcomed the freed soldiers, many of whom spent over 3 years in captivity, mostly after their capture during the 2022 defense of Mariupol. The latest exchange carried out under the Istanbul agreements included wounded troops, soldiers with serious health issues, and young defenders under the age of 25. Hundreds of families gathered near a local hospital hoping to see their loved ones or receive any information about missing service members. Despite ongoing hostilities, both sides have continued prisoner swaps following recent negotiations between delegations in Istanbul. Meanwhile, in Brussels, EU leaders have unanimously agreed to extend sanctions against Russia for another 6 months. The renewal dispels concerns that Hungary, a close Moscow ally, might block the decision. The move keeps in place sweeping restrictions, including the freezing of over 200 billion euros in Russian central bank assets. Through early 2026, EU officials confirmed that they had prepared contingency plans to maintain pressure on the Kremlin if Budapest refused to cooperate. French President Emmanuel Macron and European Council President Antonio Costa have shared their views on the sanctions issue. Let's hear what they had to say.
Aujourd'hui, ce qui reste d'actualité, c'est la seule proposition concrète qui a été faite, celle d'un cessez-le-feu inconditionnel. Nous continuons par ailleurs de préparer des nouvelles sanctions en coordination avec les États-Unis d'Amérique, au cas où ceux-ci ne trouveraient pas une réponse positive.
At the same time, we are keeping up the pressure on Russia, and we have adopted 17 packages of sanctions. And the work to deliver a new one, powerful package, is well underway.
Now we have guests joining us for this discussion. Dr. Sergey Dvo Yanov is a president of IDC Russia and director at WHD International Board, joining us live from Moscow, Russia. Thank you for joining us today. Doctor, Russia and Ukraine are still conducting prisoner swaps despite fierce fighting. Does this show there's still room for diplomacy?
Namaste, namaskar. Thank you for invitation me to the discussion. First of all, I can share my vision like a Russian philosopher. From the philosophical point of view, historical point of view, and spiritual point of view, we can see that situation, conflict between Russia and Ukraine is not conflict between Russian and Ukrainian nation. It's actually a proxy war which was created and organized by Western Alliance. Why? Because right now the new reality is a multipolar world. And Western Alliance, they want to continue their policy where they are like a privilegious club, all the Western countries, and they dictate and create the rules of the policy. It will not, this position will not exist in the future. We not start our aggression against Ukrainian nation. We start our support of Russian-speaking population in eastern part of Ukraine. And this is true, which can already confirmed a lot of times by European human rights activists and famous politicians and the independent politicians that yes, Russia want just to create justice like a main moral principle of international relationships. If we want to expect justice, if we expect, if we want to expect in future like justice like a main moral principle, we should support Russian Federation in our policy, because we in our history never and ever we put aggression on any nation. And come to the point. Right now we can see Donald Trump and America, even they are changing regarding conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And right now, Donald Trump is a big peacemaker and a very big activist to prepare this peacemaking dialogue. But unfortunately, all European leaders, they're together in one boat. They continue this policy where they can put pressure, sanction on Russian Federation. But I want again confirm and remind to all audience, our Western audience, that our country is not such kind of a country which can change our policy because of the pressure of the sanction, because we're truth lover. Policy is created because of the dharma, universal moral principle. That's why, of course, Russia will be not weak when Western countries will grab and take out our assets from banks and use these assets against us. Because God, he can see everything, and God is a witness of all activity, and God is a witness, of course, all activity of our national leader, Vladimir Putin, who is followed to Dharma. And soon we'll see the results, how all this Western European alliance will be completely destroyed because of their cheating activities.
And building on that, Dr. Sergey, much of Western media paints Russia as the aggressor and Ukraine as the victim. How would you challenge that framing from your perspective?
Of course, obviously, because it's a proxy war. In proxy war, anybody can call to the white that is a black, to black that is a white, and change all the colors. But we completely understand, because again, I want to address to all my colleagues, especially journalists, to see interview of our national leader Vladimir Putin to the famous American journalist Tucker Carlson, where he is during 2 hours explain what was the main root of the conflict with Ukraine, how Ukraine like artificial state was created by Vladimir Lenin, how they put especially this bomb to our relationship with our brother nations. I am completely sure, I know that during this proxy war, everybody from the western part of the world tried to put some blaming on our country. But thanks God, right now, more and more audience understands the truth, historical truth. We're not we're not follow to some aggression rules. We're not kill civilians. We try only support nations, Russian-speaking nations, which already chose to be with Russia and join to our country. That is their historical choice to be united with us, Russian-speaking population. Why we should tolerate aggression from the Ukraine? Because they start this aggression first. We should cancel this. It's the same like India-Pakistan conflict. We know the truth. Who divides this country, and it was before Bharat civilization, one civilization. But that is British policy. We completely understand it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sergey Dvo Yanov, for joining us and sharing that insight. Now we move on to our next news. In a controversial move, the United States has approved $30 million in direct funding to the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, an Israeli-backed group overseeing aid in war-torn Gaza. Let's listen to what the spokesperson of the State Department has said.
So what I can say is we have approved funding for $30 million to the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. And we call on other countries to also support the GHF, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, and its critical work. A track record of distributing over 46 million meals distributed to date, all while preventing Hamas looting, is absolutely incredible and should be commended and supported. From day one, we said we are open to creative solutions that securely provide aid to those in Gaza and protects Israel. This support is simply the latest iteration of President Trump's and Secretary Rubio's pursuit of peace in the region.
The State Department called the GHF's efforts incredible despite widespread criticism from the UN and major relief agencies, who refused to work with the group over neutrality concerns. Meanwhile, Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez sparked a diplomatic row by calling the situation in Gaza a genocide, urging the EU to suspend its cooperation deal with Israel. This comes as Israeli forces reportedly killed 65 people in Gaza Thursday, with local health officials saying 550 civilians have died near aid centers since late May. The GHF denies that aid sites have been deadly violent, and while humanitarian groups warn of famine-like conditions and accuse both Israel and the US of weaponizing food. Now we move on to our next news. The White House says trade talks with China are back on track. Officials confirmed both sides have reached a new understanding to implement the earlier Geneva Agreement, including expediting rare earth shipments to the US. The breakthrough comes after talks in London this month, following accusations that Beijing was slow-walking export licenses. The US President Donald Trump earlier hinted at a signed trade deal with China, while Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said the framework is now signed and sealed. Meanwhile, the US is considering extending a July 9 deadline for higher tariffs on dozens of the countries, while White House says the president may still offer individual deals or pick a reciprocal tariff rate. U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer is leading talks with key partners, and officials say announcements on new deals could come within days. Now we move on to the EU. The EU has received a new trade proposal from Washington. According to European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, she confirmed the document's arrival but didn't disclose what the US is demanding. Let's listen in.
Briefed leaders on the current state of play in our trade talks with the United States. President Trump and I had a good discussion at the G7 summit in Canada. Back then, we agreed to speed up the work with a clear goal, an agreement before the 9th of July. Today, we received the latest US document for further negotiations. We are assessing it as we speak right now. So our message today is clear. We are ready for a deal. At the same time, we are preparing for the possibility that no satisfactory agreement is reached. This is why we consulted on a rebalancing list, and we will defend the European interest as needed. In short, all options remain on the table.
German Chancellor Friedrich Merz is urging Europe to strike a quick and simple deal with the United States, not a slow and complicated one. Here's what he has said.
Deswegen auch mit den Kollegen zusammen gesagt, lass uns jetzt bitte schnell zu einer Lösung kommen. Ich habe unter anderem auch auf einzelne Industrien hingewiesen, die wir in Deutschland haben, die chemische Industrie, die pharmazeutische Industrie, der Maschinenbau, Stahl, Aluminium, Automobilindustrie, die werden zurzeit alle mit so hohen Zöllen belastet, dass das die Unternehmen wirklich gefährdet und deswegen lieber jetzt schnell und einfach als langsam und hochkompliziert. Wir müssen jetzt schnell zu einem Ergebnis kommen. Und darüber sind wir uns auch alle einig gewesen, da gibt es überhaupt keinen Dissens.
The U.S. Trade Representative's office has yet to respond to the latest proposal. Although the EU and U.S. have been in talks for weeks, the Trump administration has shifted its focus to the Iran nuclear issue and maintaining its trade truce with China. With the July 9 deadline set by President Trump fast approaching, the pressure is on, or the U.S. could double tariffs on EU imports from 10 to 20%. Now we stay in the U.S. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio will host his counterparts from Australia, India, and Japan on July 1st as Washington steps up its push for a free and open Indo-Pacific. The State Department confirmed the high-level meeting, saying it builds on the January Quad talks Rubio led, his first diplomatic move after President Trump's second term began. Deputy spokesperson Tommy Pigott said the upcoming summit will advance regional security, calling it a display of American strength, peace, and prosperity. The Quad, a strategic alliance targeting China's growing influence, recommitted to close coordination earlier this year, vowing to meet regularly ahead of planned leaders' summit in India. And this week, absences by Japanese and Australian leaders from the NATO summit have fueled new questions about the future of Indo-Pacific cooperation. President Donald Trump made a final push at the White House for Congress to approve his tax relief and spending package, dubbed the One Big Beautiful Bill. The legislation aims to extend Trump's expiring 2017 tax cuts, increase spending on border security and the military, and would add approximately $3 trillion to the federal deficit over the next decade. Let's listen to what he has said. However, deep divisions within the Republican Party, particularly over proposed Medicaid cuts and the bill's cost, have stalled progress in both the House and Senate, with lawmakers struggling to reach consensus ahead of the July 4th deadline. During the event, Trump also criticized Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell for not lowering interest rates more aggressively amid easing inflation, reiterating his belief that the Fed should take stronger action to support the economy. Now we stay in U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says a breakthrough deal is near among G7 nations, one that will exclude American companies from certain foreign taxes. He announced on social media that after months of talks on the global OECD global tax deal, the G7 is ready to unveil a joint understanding that, quote, defends American interests. The 2021 OECD deal, signed by nearly 140 countries, set a minimum global corporate tax rate of 15%. But Bessent now confirms that those OECD Pillar 2 taxes won't apply to U.S. firms, and said officials will soon push for implementation across the OECD G20 framework. He also says U.S. President Donald Trump has opposed the global tax plan and highlighted that the U.S. has made headway in negotiations. As a result, Bessent is urging lawmakers to scrap Section 899, a controversial clause in the One Big Beautiful bill that would have slapped taxes on foreign-owned firms and investors from countries unfair to U.S. companies. The clause, nicknamed a revenge tax, had sparked fears that it could discourage foreign investment in the U.S. Now we stay in North America. Guatemala and Honduras have signed new agreements with the United States that could allow them to offer refuge to migrants from other countries. Migrants who might otherwise seek asylum in the U.S. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem announced the deal at the end of her trip to Central America. The agreements advance the Trump administration's push to increase deportations by allowing migrants to be returned not just to their home countries, but to third countries as well. Despite the announcement, both Guatemala and Honduras have denied signing that what's known as a safe third country agreement. Let's listen to what U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem and Guatemala's Interior Minister Francisco Jimenez has said after the signing.
What we have done here today is signed an agreement that is a joint security agreement which will set forward unprecedented opportunity for us to share information to go after those who would wish to perpetuate harm against the citizens of Guatemala and the United States of America.
Este acuerdo nos permitirá fortalecer nuestras capacidades operativas, logísticas y humanas, facilitando una detección más efectiva de personas vinculadas a redes delictivas y terroristas.
Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.